الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بفضل الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وله الحمد في الآخرة وهو الحكيم الخبير. يعلم ما يلج في الأرض وما يخرج منها وما ينزل من السماء وما يعرج فيها وهو الرحيم الغفور. وقال الذين كفروا لا تأتينا الساعة قل بلى وربي لتأتينكم عالم الغيب لا يعزب عنه مثقال ذرة في السماوات ولا في الأرض ولا أصغر من ذلك ولا أكبر إلا في كتاب مبين. ليجزي الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات أولئك لهم مغفرة ورزق كريم. والذين سعوا في آياتنا معاجزين أولئك لهم عذاب من رجز أليم. ويرى الذين أوتوا العلم الذي أنزل إليك من ربك هو الحق ويهدي إلى صراط العزيز الحميد. وقال الذين كفروا هل ندلكم على رجل ينبئكم إذا مزقتم كل ممزق إنكم لفي خلق جديد. أفترى على الله كذبا أم به جنة بل الذين لا يؤمنون بالآخرة في العذاب والضلال البعيد. أفلم يروا إلى ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم من السماء والأرض إن نشأ نخسف بهم الأرض أو نسقط عليهم كسفا من السماء إن في ذلك لآية لكل عبد منيب. ولقد آتينا داود منا فضلا يا جبال أوبي معه والطير وألنا له الحديد أن اعمل سابغات وقدر في السرد واعملوا صالحا إني بما تعملون بصير. ولسليمان الريح غدوها شهر ورواحها شهر وأسلنا له عين القطر. ومن الجن من يعمل بين يديه بإذن ربه ومن يزغ منهم عن أمرنا نذقه من عذاب السعير. يعملون له ما يشاء من محاريب وتماثيل وجفان كالجواب وقدور الراسيات اعملوا آل داود شكرا وقليل من عبادي الشكور. فلما قضينا عليه الموت ما دلهم على موته إلا دابة الأرض تأكل من سأته. فلما خر تبينت الجن أن لو كانوا يعلمون الغيب ما لبثوا في العذاب المهين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بفضل الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، وأفضل الصلاة وأزكى التسليم على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. واللعن الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين من لدن آدم إلى قيام يوم الدين، آمين رب العالمين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. In several positions in the Quran, several verses in the Quran, when Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala starts to speak about the story of one of the messengers, we find, for example, in Surah Al-Shu'ara, they have the same sentence that they say to their people and to the nation that they were trying to guide to the right path. And there is one only obstacle that stands between the nations and believing in the message of the Prophet or the messenger that he brought. So we notice in Surah Al-Shu'ara, in the verses 106, 177, about 5 verses, about several prophets. إِذْ قَالَ لَهُمْ شُعَيْبٌ أَلَا تَتَّقُونَ. Shu'aib speaks to his nation and tell them, don't you have fear from Allah? Don't you have piety? And Shu'aib, of course, he was sent to a nation to guide them to worship Allah, and at the same time not to steal the people's money, not to alter with the weight, and not to trick the people and deceive them and making them pay more than they had to pay. So وَلَا تَبْخَسُ النَّاسَ أَشْيَاءَهُم. So in terms of trade, they were deviated. Prophet Shu'aib was trying to guide them. He said to them, وَإِذْ قَالَ لَهُمْ شُعَيْبٌ أَلَا تَتَّقُونَ إِذْ قَالَ لَهُمْ أَخُوهُمْ نُوحٌ أَلَا تَتَّقُونَ. Nuh as well told them, don't you fear Allah? Don't you have piety? إِذْ قَالَ لَهُمْ أَخُوهُمْ هُودٌ أَلَا تَتَّقُونَ. Nuh the grandfather, Hud the grandson. And both of them were sent in order to guide the people and stop them from worshipping idols, which they built themselves and gave them names. إذ قال لهم أخوهم صالح ألا تتقون. Prophet Salih as well, when they asked him in mockery to bring a camel out of the mountain, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made that happen in front of them. And who doesn't believe in a miracle such as the miracle of Prophet Salih? And the only condition was to allow the camel drink one day from the well, and they drink the second day. And on top of that, they were benefiting from the camel. On the day that the camel comes out, they were benefiting from the milk of the camel. On top of that, they waited for the camel to come out and drink, and they shot it and killed it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought upon them the punishment. إِذْ قَالَ لَهُمْ أَخُوهُمْ لُوطٌ أَلَا تَتَّقُونَ. The nation of Lut as well. And of course, until today we are living amongst them, and we face this deviation every day. So in every single kind of deviation, the only thing that the people didn't have is piety. And then we start to think, after them seeing the miracles and getting to know the truth which is suitable to their fitrah, what keeps these hearts harsh? What stops them from achieving piety? We mentioned last night about one of the obstacles between man and certainty and yaqeen, and how Imam Zayn al-Abidin, he stood up in front of Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad and he spoke up even though that it might cause harm, even though that he knew that it's not going to affect, but as if he was telling him, I am not afraid of death. It means I have yaqeen. And we mentioned three things that stands as an obstacle between us and yaqeen. One of them is having no fear from Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. And we mentioned the saying of Imam Zayn al-Abidin. He said, Man khaf Allah, akhaf Allah minhu kullu shay. Whoever fears Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, Allah will make everything fears him. So piety is not fearing Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So these people, they had anti-piety. The same way I put antivirus in my device in case there are some viruses. They dealt with piety like that. They had things within that stopped them from reaching that level. And when it comes to the pious ones, the statuses of the pious ones in the eyes of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, it differs. The statuses of the people, it differs according to the level of piety that they have. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. That the people that has the highest status in the eyes of Allah, the nearest people to Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala are the most pious. All of our dates, a'mal, the recommended actions, prayers, fasting, it will have no value except if it was accompanied with piety. Is piety something easy to achieve? Not nowadays. Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِنَّمَا حصر. It's limited to this. إِنَّمَا يَتَقَبَّلُ اللَّهُ مِنَ الْمُتَّقِينَ. Allah only accepts the deeds from those who have piety. Otherwise, if I'm a person who's effective in the community, if I'm a person who gives out charity, if I'm a person even that I do my usual ibadat, but I do not have piety, yes, it can contradict. I might be a person who perform my ibadat, but at the same time I'm not pious. And then all of these deeds and actions, all of these efforts that I put will have no value. And piety is a malaka. It's something that when I train myself upon, it becomes something natural. It doesn't require effort. The bigger the container I have, which is my heart, when this heart is greater, which is, I'm not talking about this physical heart. The greater the heart is, the greater the container is, then a person can contain more goodness. As Allah tabarak wa ta'ala says in the Quran, أنزل من السماء ماء فسالت أودية بقدرها. So, some people, their piety stops them from committing sins, stops them from committing haram. There is a higher status and a better people that their piety stops them from doing the makruh, the unlikely recommended deeds. There are some people that their piety pushes them and motivates them to do the wajibat on time, the prayers on time, fasting properly. And there is a better people that their piety will push them to do mustahabbat and recommended acts, where they don't have a problem with doing it and they don't see that it requires a lot of effort. So the level of piety, it's according to how much I'm willing to contain. As Amirul Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi says, Al-qulubu aw'iyah ya Kumail. Imagine Amirul Mu'mineen when he went to that desert walking with Kumail and he took a deep breath as a person who is pondering. And he said, Ya Kumail, inna al-quluba aw'iyah, fa khayruha aw'ah. The best of the hearts are the hearts that contain more. So the kind of things that the hearts contain is the level of piety that pushes me to do better. While piety, when it comes to the awliyaullah, like Al-Imam al-Hussein, like Amir al-Mu'mineen, like Rasulullah and Ahlul Bayt al-Isma li dhikrim, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Their motto would be altruism, will be ithar, even though if it's not required from them to do it. Like Al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, all of that sacrifices that he made, knowing that when he asked Rasulullah that I want to go with you into this grave. Rasulullah told him that there is a status in heaven that you won't get until this will happen, until you are martyred. So if Al-Imam al-Hussein chose not to go, he would lose the title of Imamah. But Al-Imam al-Hussein was willing to give this sacrifice because their motto is Ithar. For example, Amir al-Mu'mineen, when he was physically and officially the Khalifa, he's the number one man, he's the leader. And when he's giving a sermon, people look up to him. And he had Qanbar with him. He had the servant, his assistant Qanbar. Who looks at Qanbar? No one. If Amir al-Mu'mineen is giving a lecture, they look upon Amir al-Mu'mineen. They take Amir al-Mu'mineen as a role model. But on top of that, Amir al-Mu'mineen, every time he went to buy a cloth for himself, he would buy a cloth for Qanbar and he would give him the better one. Even though that he was the Khalifa. And Qanbar would ask, why? He said to him, أنت شاب ولك شره الشباب. You are a young man and you have the desire of wearing these neat clothes that look better. And Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salam alayhi would give it to him. He wants to fulfill that desire in the heart of Qanbar radwanullahi ta'ala alayhi. So Ahlul Bayt, even though in a small acts, their motto was Ithar. So the level of taqwa, of piety differs from a person to another, and our role models are Ahlul Bayt salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. And the lowest level of taqwa, what is the lowest level of piety? And this lowest level, if a human being goes underneath that level, he's not a human anymore. He's just a being, like any other being on this earth. Even though he gives out charity, even though he's effective in the community, even though he prays, even though he fasts. So the bottom level of taqwa is what? Is to stick to the wajibat, to the duties of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, and to avoid the muharramat. As per the hadith, أن لا يراك الله حيث نهاك, that Allah shouldn't see you where He told you not to be. وأن لا يفقدك حيث أمرك, and you should be present in the places that Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala told you to be. So if I do all of these recommended acts, I pray on time, I fast, but I have one single sin that I am stubborn upon, that I'm not willing to change it, then I'm not a pious person. And this doesn't contradict with what the Quran mentions about the sifat al-muttaqeen. When the Quran describes the pious ones, the verse says, الَّذِينَ إِذَا فَعَلُوا فَاحِشَةً. Yes, sometimes they fall in the trap and they commit a great sin, but what happens? The difference between them and the non-pious is that they remember and then they seek repentance and then they fix. If their action had consequences, they would fix it. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So this was the introduction. It is that accurate. One single bad deed, one single sin that I'm not willing to change, that I say, well, I pray on time, I do this, I do that. Well, I still have one simple mistake. Well, I have to live with it. Ya Rab, samihni. That single thing, it will remove the title of piety from me. And then I'm not considered a human being anymore. So, the second part of my talk, the element of piety. Nowadays, and in this world, it's very hard to achieve. One of the hardest things to achieve. And to be practicing is one of the hardest things to achieve as well. And I'll give an example. One of the examples is chastity. And we spoke a bit about it in Shahr Muharram in the first 10 days, but we didn't give it its right. But when we speak about chastity, the first thing that comes to our mind is what? Is hijab and the woman wearing hijab. In fact, chastity is not that. Hijab is one example of iffa. Hijab is one example of chastity. While chastity, the definition of it is for a man and a woman to form a full barrier between them if they are strangers. A full barrier. I know that this might sound extreme to some, especially nowadays. But this is the issue that we're trying to solve. Because nowadays it's considered extreme. This is why I'm saying it's very hard to achieve taqwa nowadays. It's very hard to be a practicing Muslim nowadays. So now we have like the Definition of chastity is for the man and the woman to form a full barrier between them, especially, not especially, always when they are strangers. If they're not related as brothers and sisters and husband and wife. And there shouldn't be any kind of communication that leads, not any kind of communication that leads to raib, suspicious, or to flirting, or having some kind of مثل بقول إن إحنا عندنا باللبنان خوشبوشية مثلا. So as I mentioned earlier, taqwa is one of the hardest thing to achieve, but for 3 reasons. And I gave the chastity as an example. 3 reasons that we are dealing with nowadays in the Muslim community. What are these 3 reasons? I will mention them after Salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. One of the reasons that affects chastity, which would lead to eliminating piety, is that the inappropriate scenes is very achievable, easy to achieve. Before, years ago, and older people would understand, when at school or at uni or when you see a bad person in the community, for them to achieve this stuff, it required a lot of effort and a long process to find a photo in a magazine that is thrown, and the way they give it to each other in a secret way, it was very hard. But now, it's wherever we go, it invaded our house. And the reason why I'm mentioning this, I noticed in few centers, I don't want to mention which center, but I see kids in the center, they have their device, going through reels, and I was watching one of the kids from far away, going through the reels, and the things that he was able to see, and no one was supervising him, these things are very against chastity. Inappropriate scenes, inappropriate phones, inappropriate reels that they are able to see. Just because they have a device, they have a YouTube on it, YouTube has reels, they just skip through the reels and they see whatever they want. And as I mentioned before, it required effort, but now it invaded our house. Even the pious ones, even the religious ones. If I have my phone and I want to use my social media to benefit myself, I want to listen to a lecture on YouTube, but then there is ads. The things that happened by force, I didn't mean to, it just came up. I'm skipping through the reels, it just came up. I'm not going to be blamed for, but it will have an effect. It will cause a hijab upon my heart. A blank paper, if you're holding a pen, and out of nowhere, by mistake, you scratched on it. You are not to blame, it's just a mistake. But can you still write on that paper? Yes, you can, but it's not going to be neat. And usually what we do is we take it off and throw it away. So same thing, even for a pious person, I have a phone that is full of ads, I have social media, that I want to use the reels in order to get entertained. That's all right. There is a funny video here, a funny video there, maybe like a lecture up, a reel of a lecture here. But then the ads that they came up, they get worse day after day. Even though that I'm not to blame, but at the same time, it will have an effect upon my heart. The hadith says, Al-qalbu mushaf al-basar, that the heart is the notebook of the sight. As I mentioned earlier, the pen, once you write by mistake, it's written. Al-qalbu mushaf al-basar. Whatever you look at, an-nadhara sahmun min siyam iblis. The look is an arrow of the arrows of Iblis. Once I looked, a reel after a reel, an ad after an ad, like an inappropriate photo after inappropriate photo, what happens? One of these times, my desire will be triggered. And then I will act upon it. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ صَلَّى عَلَى مُحَمَّدٍ وَآلِ مُحَمَّدٍ. So to keep the chastity of the sight, of the tongue, of the private parts, of the stomach, to keep the chastity of that, it became a hard mission. Even when it comes to food, I'm trying to do diet, for example. Wherever you go, like everyone has a chef page and they cook. I'm struggling with that, for example, with the life in Australia. Wherever you go, LMCT plus, LMCT plus, LMCT plus. All of these, we have a lot of people that are playing a role in this, and it is haram. But the life here, they just advertise according to what the people need. And we are merely, just customers for them. No one cares about my morals. No one cares about my religion. I am the one who cares about my heart. I'm the only one who cares about myself and my religion and my status on the day of judgment. Even when it comes to the opposite gender. Wherever you go now, you have topless men on. Even when you go to the latmiyat, unfortunately. You go on the internet, you see the latmiyat that are live streamed and with people that are topless, and it's not permissible for a woman to look upon a topless man. Apart from it being haram, it will cause a hijab upon the heart. It will cause that nadra, as I mentioned, al-qalbu mushaful basar. So it invaded all of our homes. The second reason, the easy, free communication with the opposite gender. Number three, that thing I'm not gonna elaborate on it. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The forced mixing that is targeted. There is a goal there. Feminism that happened. And all of this is a process to do what? To make the mixing between the genders very normalized. In the university, at work, wherever you go, mixing is everywhere. And it is one of the reasons, I'm not saying that it is haram in itself, but I'm saying it's one of the reasons that affects chastity, which will reduce piety and will be an anti-piety in ourselves. And the people who are concerned about the moralities, they made a study. Some of the young men and some of the young women, their moralities changed and decreased after they started to get mixed. And we see that men that usually go to mixed gatherings, they always look after themselves and always the best perfume they have and the best haircut. I'm not saying Islamically, it's very recommended for me to be neat at all times. But the intention is different. But when it comes to the women as well, when they work, and then you look at the boys when they visit each other to argue with each other, how they look, how do they look? I visited my brother-in-law today. I was wearing pajamas and high-vis and work boots. So when we visit each other as men, you know, like you don't look after yourself. But if I am always in a mixed community, I have to, their moralities, they decreased. All of these reasons they made achieving taqwa is a hard mission. Number three, the third part of my lecture after Salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Religion fixed this issue for us. Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, with the system that He embedded in us. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allah gave us the means. Allah gave us the tools to keep ourselves on the right path and not to slip. But the human being himself polluted that fitrah. We polluted that fitrah. I formed a veil upon this fitrah because this fitrah, it's created in a way that it always attracts the person towards Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, while the nafs takes him the opposite way. Takes him to the desires and the pleasures. Religion fixed that and made it easy. That's why Allah in the Quran says, وَمَنْ أُدْخِلَ الْجَنَّةِ مَنْ زُحْزِحَ عَنِ النَّارِ وَأُدْخِلَ الْجَنَّةِ. Going to heaven is easy. Is easy. But what makes it hard is ourselves. Al-Hasan al-Basri once told Imam Zain al-Abidin, I think, he said to him, لَيْسَ الْعَجَبْ مِمَّنْ هَلَكْ كَيْفَ هَلَكْ وَلَكِنَّ الْعَجَبْ مِمَّنْ نَجَى كَيْفَ نَجَى. It's not surprising when we see someone perish. But what's surprising is to see someone survives. How did he survive? In a world like this, that is full of things that attracts him towards the sin. And then the Imam corrected him. He said, no. لَيْسَ الْعَجَبْ مِمَّنْ نَجَى كَيْفَ نَجَى. It's not surprising when someone survives. لكنما العجب ممن هلك كيف هلك مع سعة رحمة الله. No, it is surprising for those who perish, how they did perish. And Allah's mercy is great. Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, not only that He forgives the sin, Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala gave us the means to achieve piety very easily. One of the means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helped the human being in order to achieve jihadun nafs, Allah gave him modesty, haya. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us modesty for the men and the women in a very great amount. Look at a child. The children of a human being, since I was young, since a person is young, he has haya. Look, يعني, for example, a child that is still wearing nappies, when they want to go to the toilet, they hide themselves. Or sometimes they kick their parents out. You know? And this is within, it's built within. But who plays a role in eliminating the modesty in the children? Sometimes the parents. Sometimes the parents themselves, they play a role in this. From how the father deals with the mother at home, and vice versa. From how they dress at home in front of their children. From how they dress their kids and they let them go. I'm not saying that it is haram if a girl is under 9 or if a boy is still young to dress them in a certain way. But if they dress in a certain way, it affects the modesty. How do you expect that this girl will wear hijab, a proper hijab, if she is dressed like that and she goes out? If the parents allow her to do that. And this is something, as I mentioned, I've been seeing around in this community. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And Allah says in the Quran, Ya bani Adam, la yaftinannakum ash-shaytan. This is the verse that I mentioned in the first night in Ashura. I said the enemy of the human being, and what makes a human being deserves that Allah brags about him when he does one thing good and he becomes better than the angels, is that he's tested with something that the angels are not tested with. He has the enemy that's called the shaitan, that his aim is to do what? Is to take away the modesty from the human being. Ya bani Adam, la yaftinannakum ash-shaytan. Do not allow the shaitan to lure you and to distract you. Kama akhraja abawaykum min al-jannah. How? He lured your parents from heaven, as in Adam and Eve. ينزع عنهما لباسهما. He takes their clothes away from them. And here it means the haya. Not that the shaitan was able to remove the haya from Adam, but this was the goal of the shaitan. This is what he wanted, to remove the modesty from a human being. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala gave me modesty. And it is a way to strengthen my chastity, which will keep my piety intact. So haya will help me to form that full barrier with the opposite gender. Amir al-Mu'mineen, in one of his sermons, he went up and he was angry. He said, بلغني أن النساء تزاحم الرجال في الأسواق. I heard that the women are تزاحم, as in like, يعني, going into the crowds and pushing men in the markets. أما تستحون. And Sayyidah Zainab alayha salam, the greatest thing that affected her in that trip, what? She asked if they can move the spear that had the head of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein aside, so that people can be distracted by looking upon the head. And she said, فَلَقَدْ خُزِينَا مِنْ كَثْرَةِ النَّظَرِ إِلَيْنَا. We are embarrassed from how much the people are looking at us. The second tool and the means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala planted in us to achieve piety is dignity and pride. Al-karama wal-kibriya. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave man the dignity and gave it to women in a greater level. Much more. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the woman, while the human being himself, he ruins that dignity and gets rid of it by exposing himself to the introductions of the sins, by acting in a way just to impress the opposite gender, for example, or exposing myself to the sins. As we mentioned yesterday, وَمَنْ يَدْخُلْ مَدَاخِلَ السُّوءِ يُتَّهَمْ Rasulullah, with his wife, he was speaking to her behind the masjid, and he called upon them and said, look, wait, come here, this is my wife Safiya. وَمَنْ يَدْخُلْ مَدَاخِلَ السُّوءِ يُتَّهَمْ. An example, Harthama was sent by Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad with a group of people as messengers. I think this before the trip of Imam al-Hussein, before he started his journey towards Al-Kufa. And he came just as a messenger. He said, فَصِرْتُ إِلَى الْحُسَيْنِ. I came to Imam al-Hussein as a messenger. And then the Imam asked him, are you with us or are you against us? He said, I'm not with you and I'm not against you. He said, I have children that I left and I'm afraid that Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad would kill them. Then the Imam told him, فَمْضِ حَيْثُ لَا تَرَى لَنَا مَقْتَلًا. Go to a place that you won't see us getting killed. And you won't hear us calling for help. فوالذي نفس الحسين بيده لا يسمع اليوم واعيتنا أحد فلا يعيننا إلا كبه الله لوجهه في جهنم. By Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, whoever hears our tragedy and he doesn't help us, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala throws him upon his face on the hellfire, in the hellfire. Not only that, he already lost by not aiding Al-Imam al-Hussein, but at the same Al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is telling him, do not expose yourself to a situation that will put upon your shoulders a responsibility that you know from yourself that you're not going to fulfill. You're not going to do your duty towards. So dignity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave it to us, but we waste it. I waste it by exposing myself at least to the introduction of this sin, the thing that can affect my piety, and then it will act as anti-piety, which is the title of our sermon today. The third tool and the third weapon, al-ghira, arda. This is the best word that I could find for ghira, which is, in order to explain it more, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. It refers to intense enthusiasm, passion or zeal for something. It is a strong feeling for energy and eagerness, often associated with love, devotion, or fervent interest in particular activity or a cause. And usually they use it for a man that he's ara for his wife. He feels ara for his wife. He feels ara, for example, for his home country, where he has ghira. And we have Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas salawatullahi wa salam alayhi as a symbol for al-ghira. And this is a weapon that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala planted in us that we should use. But what happens? A human being himself, he breaks that ghira. For example, religion says, yukrah as-salam ala shab. It's very unlikely recommended to say salam to a young woman. Amirul Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salam alayhi, if he passes by women, he wouldn't even say assalamu alaikum. Why? Maybe in case that if she has to respond, and then I get attracted to her voice. It triggers. And this is the nature of a man. I'm forced sometimes to mix with the opposite gender at work, at school. It's all right. It's not haram. But keep it limited to the job that I have to do. And the human being in his nature is weak, da'if. I can fall for anything. So as I mentioned, chastity is only an example. I will mention the last part of my lecture after Salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. What acts sometimes as anti-piety is intellectual flaws. I might have an intellectual flaw, a misunderstanding. One of the examples is some people, they think that there are benefits and profits that they are out there in this world that the religion ignored. They say, well, the intellects reached many things that can be beneficial, but the religion is too old. Maybe the religion ignores this part, and the religion doesn't know that it's beneficial, and now the minds in the world, they know better than the religion. As if religion is limited to a time, and it doesn't work for this time, and they say that the time has changed. So why would the religion consider this haram, and it's very profitable and very beneficial for the mu'mineen? I think that I know better than the religion. For example, on this day we have the art of singing. It's a knowledge nowadays. You go to university, you learn the maqamat, you learn the music, you learn the notes, and then you graduate, people graduate. And nowadays, even Rawadid and Qurra Aza, they study these things. But sometimes they can say, well, this is a knowledge. Islam shouldn't say that it is haram. You know, the Aza has to elevate a level. You know, then they start to put the sound effects or the certain tones, the ghina, singing, everything that according to urf is considered singing is haram. Even if I use Islamic words in it. If something sounds like an English song, then it's haram. Or it sounds like an Arabic song, it's haram. While in the fiqh, everything that sounds like majalis al-lahu wal-tarab, or the congregations of lahu or fun, or like discos, is haram. Like we have some examples of the latm al-shur nowadays. The second example on the intellectual flaws, people, they say the future is what's important. As long as the future, how to build my future, especially as I repeat, how the world and the system of the world works nowadays, they concentrate on how to build the future. It doesn't matter if the sacrifice is religion. You know, you have a family that as long as their child is present in a community that has majalis, masajid, you know, prayers on time, they encourage that. But their dream, for example, is for their son to go to that kind of university, to be like an engineer or to be a doctor. Even if he travels to a different country that affects his religion, or even, for example, choosing that study will affect his religion, doesn't matter, because the dreams of the parents is for their son to be successful in that way. So now they concentrate on the future. And what is the cost? The cost is piety. The cost is nearness to Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. And the materialism plays a role where al-uns bid-deen disappears. Finding tranquility in religion disappears. Why? Because I have masalih, I have benefits, I have my future to think about, and religion is stopping that. Because my priority is the future of my children or my future, and religion is the only obstacle, then materialism is acting as anti-piety. We ask Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala to grant us the tawfiq and the ability to use the anti-piety and be able to fix that. And we ask Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala not to test us with this. We ask Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala to hasten the appearance of Sahib al-Asr wa Zaman, Ajjal Allah ta'ala farajahu sharif, and to grant us the tawfiq and the ability to be of his supporters, to be of those who will be martyred under his standard and flag. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. To hasten the appearance of Sahib al-Asr wa Zaman, to grant us our needs in this dunya and in the hereafter, and the highest of status in the hereafter. ولأرواح أموات المؤمنين والمؤمنات من مات على الإيمان الشهداء والعلماء خدمة الحسين. نهدي للجميع ثواب ما قرأنا وثواب المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.